Hello. Today we're going to be discussing a scenario where a 54-year-old female is brought into the emergency room by paramedics. She was found wandering in a park, yelling at people. A jogger called 911, and it turns out that she fell, scraped her face, and scraped her arm. Pretty bad. She comes in, and she smells a BO. She smells like urine, and she's just extremely combative. Now, my first impressions, based off of that, I would say three things. One, she's homeless. Two, she's on the schizophrenic spectrum as defined in our textbook. And three, she probably has some sort of substance abuse issue that's evident by her asking for a bottle. She needs a bottle. Now, that could be anything. It could be liquor, or she could be delusional and think that she's a baby and wants a baby bottle. Fine. Now, the short and long term effects of schizophrenia, they kind of go hand in hand because schizophrenia is a chronic illness. So if she's 54, right, and the typical age of diagnosis for schizophrenia in women is 25 to 35. That means at the least she has been suffering with this for almost 20 years, right? So she's already in the long term. And part of that is not being able to interact in normal society, which kind of forces them to become homeless and live in poverty because they can't hold a job and they can't go about their day-to-day activities like me and you do. Her hands are shaky, so that's part of the disease process. It causes erratic movements as well as erratic behaviors. But it's also interesting that the drugs that they prescribe to treat schizophrenia, they also induce Parkinson's-like symptoms. So typically they're given the antipsychotics, but they're also given the anticholinergics to combat those Parkinson's-like symptoms. Now, she's confused as well, right? So granted, she fell, so she could have suffered a concussion, but schizophrenia also causes people to be delusional, right? Sometimes they hear voices or whatever. So that's one of two reasons why she's confused. And the combativeness, that has to deal with, one, she's homeless, and two, she is schizophrenic or on the spectrum. And I say homeless because if you're living in the street, if you're living on the street, you have to be hard. You can't be a nice, essentially oblivious person, because if you living on the street, anything can happen to you. So you always got to be you kind of have to have your guard up. You can't, it's not like someone that lives in Gilbert where they can just walk around all, ooh, like that's just not the reality. And the assessments that need to be done, of course, a medical assessment, medical history. Are you diabetic? You have high blood pressure? You allergic to any drugs? Anything like that? Of course, that's important. But what I feel is most important is assessing environmental factors. Like, do you have a job? Are you homeless? Do you have family out here? Do you have a support system? Things like that. Now, the research question is pharmaceuticals and non-pharmaceuticals and the use of insurance, which, let's talk about pharmaceutical measures first, right? So there's some major typical drugs that are prescribed: thorazine, proloxin, clarazole, right? And these are antipsychotics, and they bring down the dopamine levels because people with schizophrenia have heightened dopamine levels, which causes that euphoric feeling, right? So by giving these antipsychotics and bringing down their dopamine levels, it's the idea behind it is to level them out, right? And on top of that, of course, we need to implement some sort of non-pharmaceutical measure. So for me, it would probably be a rehab facility or some sort of psychiatric, like verbally speaking, right? To help identify things that can help them as they go along their life, maybe to identify, hey, these are my triggers. This is what causes me to have schizophrenic episodes, or this is what helps me bring me back. And, but that's not the case for everyone. Some people just can't be reorientated back into normal life, right? But we also have to understand we live in a country that healthcare is not a right, it's a privilege. Meaning, if you can afford it, cool, you can get help. If you can't, I don't know what to tell you. Now, luckily there are services for people without insurance and homeless people specifically, like the CAS. Here in Arizona, it's called the CAS, Central Arizona Shelter and Services. Right there, homeless people can get bathed, they can get food, they can get some place to sleep. But most importantly, they can work with a social worker that will help them find things that will help them. Either they'll direct them to a rehab facility, or they'll get them in touch with a psychiatrist, whatever it may be. And those are really the options for someone that suffers from schizophrenia.